This is Join Us in France, episode 237. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where you'll hear pragmatic advice for your next trip to France. I was born and raised in France, but I lived in English-speaking countries for a couple of decades, so I'm very familiar with the differences between the two cultures. I'm back in France now and on a quest to rediscover my own country with some help from my listeners. On the podcast, I invite travel enthusiasts to join me for conversations about how their trip went, what they loved, and what they wouldn't do again. This show is made possible by Patreon supporters, one-time donors who send in a tip, and soon to be released GPS-aware tours more after the interview. On today's episode, my good friend Elise, who is also a professional tour guide, tells us about 8 towns or villages in the Ariège that she loves. Ariège is spelled Ariege. If you're exploring the southwest of France, these are towns you could see as a day trip from Toulouse. But if you're a hiker, you'll probably want to spend a little more time in the area so you have time to hike to those great Cathar castles, some of the most beautiful villages of France. We talk about a Renaissance chateau. We've got a lot of inspiration for you today. Show notes and photos for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/232. And there you'll find links to other episodes we've done about this part of France, the southwest of France, my neck of the woods, also called Occitanie. Hello, Elise.
Hello, Annie.
Bonjour, bonjour. I haven't seen you in a long time.
In a long time.
We haven't gotten together to record for like a month.
That is very long.
Very long. Weird.
It is.
Today we're talking about a day trip from Toulouse to Ariège.
To Ariège.
And 7 places that you can go on a day trip.
Yeah.
It's a nice little circular thing.
Right.
And you will see some places that are unbelievably wonderful.
Yes.
And I've seen 2 of them.
She's always seen 2 of them. No,
I have. It's true. So I'm going to have to catch up with you again.
You'll have to catch up with me again. Yeah. I will do another day circuit. And of course, Ariège is a department, just like all the departments in France. And it's a department that is basically south of Toulouse and includes the valley, the foothills, and the mountains of the Pyrenees. Mm-hmm. So it's an adventure going in that direction because you have a lot of variation in land, and it's filled with some very beautiful old things as well.
Yes. All right.
So here we go.
Go down the list.
So let's go down the list. So the best way to begin this circuit is to get on the autoroute that takes you to the road that goes south towards the towns of Pamiers and Foix, which are the 2 biggest towns or small cities in the Ariège.
Right. Use a GPS.
Yeah, it's really easy. It's really, really easy. And the first stop along the way.
But you need a car. You can't do this without a car.
No, you can do 1 or 2 of these things by transportation, but you can't do the circuit at all.
Right. No, yeah.
No, this is definitely something that you need a car to do.
Or you could hire us to do it with you,
right.
if you wish. But
that's right.
But if you don't want to drive, we can arrange that. But
that's right.
Don't.
But you can't do this.
Don't ask us how to get there with public transportation. It cannot be done.
It cannot be done. No, you can get to one of the stops, and that's about it.
Yeah.
You can get in and out. But we're going to do a circuit that takes us to some tiny little things that are a little bit off the beaten track, and that are actually wonderful surprises. Mm-hmm. So we're going to start with one of them. It's one of my favorite places to go in that area. And it's a tiny, tiny, tiny little village and an underground church called Vals.
Vals.
Vals, yes. And as it is Occitan, we pronounce the S at the end.
Yeah.
And there we are. And it's a teeny little place. Really, there are signs that will get you there. It's off the beaten track. It's on a tiny little hill facing south. So actually from there, you look out over the valley and the foothills. And I was just back there a couple of weeks ago, and you could still see the snow on top of the mountains in the Pyrenees. So it's really quite lovely.
Yeah. That sounds good.
It's a.
So how teeny is this village?
Well, there's approximately 100 people who live there.
Okay.
That's small. And not all of them live actually in the little cluster that makes up the village.
Yes. For some of them, it's just too much activity.
It just has, it's houses, in the surrounding area. Yeah, they would just get blown away by it.
No. Somebody walking by.
Somebody walking by.
Go 5 miles away from the village.
However, in spite of the fact that it is that small, it actually has a lovely little cafe restaurant.
Oh, that's good.
And it's very nice. And it was, of course, we went on a weekend, okay? And I did ask, it's run by a mother and daughter, and it's simply called the Café de Vals,
Oui.
Café Restaurant de Vals. But it's really charming because they had a fire going inside, and so on a chilly day, you can go in and just get a coffee, which is what we did. But they also serve food, and I asked them, and they actually have 3 rooms for rent, and it's open all year.
Oh,
they
wow.
live there. I mean, they live in this little town, and of course, other than that, there are no. There's no commerce there. It's just,
Right.
it's really.
So do they also sell like cigarettes and
No,
newspapers?
no, nothing at all. No. During the high season, there is a tiny little cafe that serves as a tiny museum as well. That's only open in the high season. That's charming.
Ariège.
It's very charming because they have a lot of the proto-historic stuff. So this is the story of Vals. Vals is actually one of many little places that are in the beginning of the foothills of the Pyrenees that have been where they've discovered lots of archaeological finds, and so they know that people have lived there from really Neolithic times. Which, of course, we're getting into the area that's close to the big caves that are much more famous and things like that are higher up. But in the past 50 years, there've been a lot of excavations. There's been a lot of archaeological work. So they have found lots of artifacts, and therefore they've put them in this tiny little museum, which is really quite adorable, and it has photographs of all of this.
But that's not open year round.
It's not open year round. What is open year round, and which is lovely, is this underground church, and it is taken care of by the people in the village, so that even though its access is absolutely free, there is a sign with a little kind of letterbox nearby that says that since it is the people who live there that actually keep it open, take care of it, that if you have appreciated the visit, it would be nice to leave a little bit of money, which I certainly did, because it is really a labor of love on the part of the people who live in the village.
A little bit like this podcast.
Yeah, like, exactly. Yeah. I think, and so what's the story? Well, the story is that in the 1600s, a church was built on the top of this very big rock. And when they built the church, they discovered that there was another church that had been carved out of an open space in the center of this enormous piece of rock. It's a rock that is called Pouding, which is this kind of a conglomerate rock. It's not limestone, it's not granite, it's this mix of all kinds of things.
So you're going to have to spell Pouding.
It's Pouding. It's Poudingue. Pouding.
Poudingue.
Yeah, Pouding, yeah. And so what happened was that little by little, a lot of archaeologists and art historians became more interested in figuring out what was going on, because there was this church that was built up on top, and in the 19th century they did a lot more work, and then of course again in the 20th century, and lo and behold, after they took out some soot and some dirt that had accumulated, what they discovered was an original chapel that probably dates from the 700s.
Oh, wow.
And it is really special in the sense that there's a certain kind of, it's tiny. It's actually really tiny. There's a small little basin that was carved out of the stone that was probably used for the benedictions. And then there's a little piece in a kind of natural alcove on the other side. And it was probably it was at first probably a hermitage. It was probably used by certain hermits who were looking for a place like they did. You have a very big one, of course, that's at Santa Milione, and there are some other places like that.
Yes.
At that time, hermits would go off to live in these very isolated little, very rustic, primitive places. And because there's a kind of natural rock formation that closes up on one side, that was when they carved out the original church. And then what happened was that approximately 200 years later, when there was already the beginning of what became the counts and the nobility, the descendants of Charlemagne, they built just a little bit up in the same rock formation. They actually built a chapel, this time actually built out of local stone. And it's a very small Romanesque style chapel that is covered with frescoes.
Oh, wow.
And the frescoes, some of which, of course, have basically faded away, but some of which are still there. You can get a good idea because the ceiling and the upper walls on this very small U-shaped little Romanesque chapel are covered with them. And
so these are 900s?
900s, yeah.
Wow.
And they are among the oldest frescoes found anywhere in the region. And they are very well preserved, considering how old they are. They are
yeah.
Well, and in the 1990s, a specialist actually did some work cleaning them up. So they're not very bright colors. It's not like you can see these things popping out at you. But enough of the frescoes is visible that you understand what they represent, what the stories are. And they were done in a style that's called the Catalonia style. Mm-hmm. Now, we know that no artist left their names anywhere for these things, but they correspond in style to work that was done all through Catalonia, going into actually the Pyrenees. Mm-hmm. So this is the work of who's a man, assuming it was a man, we are, of course, not 100% sure, called the Master of Perdre, because there's a small town, Perdret.
Okay.
There's a little town somewhere in Catalonia and in the Pyrenees Orientales that was the first place to be identified that has this particular style.
I see.
And that's what they do. So then they say, oh, well, look, it looks like it was done by the same person. And that's as good as we get is giving it a name,
Yeah.
So, but it was a wonderful discovery. And because this is really datable to that far back, what happened was that people came and they kind of considered to be very special. So
yeah, I would say so.
In the 1100s, they actually added to this chapel.
Yeah.
And that was the first time they actually built up from the actual rock and a little bit of the stone walls. And then in the 1300s, they added on to it again. Mm-hmm. None of this is huge, but it's interesting because you have 1, 2, 3, 4 levels. And then in the late 1700s, they actually added something else. And that part was actually redone in the 19th century. So if you go all the way up to the top, you have a couple of very beautiful 19th century stained glass windows, which it's very strange because they actually work. Somehow the combination of all these different things works. And none of this is very big. So it's very compact. And you enter into it through the opening in the rock, which is down below.
So the primitive church,
the very
700
primitive
church.
The very primitive one. And then you go a little bit.
Up some stairs?
Up some stairs in this narrow passageway that is literally the natural opening of this rock shifting.
Yep.
And then you go through one door and then you see this very primitive space. And then you go up a couple of steps and you get to the gorgeous 900s chapel with the beautiful frescoes. And then there are a couple of buttons you can press to put some light on so that you get to see them really well. And then there's a nice altar table there. And then if you turn around, you go up a couple more steps and you get to the 1300s church. And then you go up some more steps and you get to the 1700s, 1900s church. And it's really fabulous because every time you turn around, you have a different point of view. And then from the very top, there's a door that leads you out onto what amounts to a balcony. And you look out over the valley and the Pyrenees.
Very nice.
And it's really beautiful. And if you stand on, we were just there on a day. It was very, very windy. I'm not big on wind, but really I'm not. Out on the balcony, it's not a paved balcony. It's just grass, and there's this kind of an overlook, But when you get up there, you realize if you look to your left, that's where the archaeological dig is. And there you can see, and you have access to it. You can go out the church and just walk through it. There's the foundation of what was the chateau from the 13th century, because there was a count that actually lived there. Because, in those days, every tiny little place had its own nobility.
Right.
So there was a
lot of them
count,
did, yeah.
That had, and he was connected in some way to the family of the Lévy Mirepoix, who, of course, were the big nobility of the area. And so they've been doing a lot of archaeological investigation to see what else they can find. And in the process, that's when they found pieces of pottery that go back to Neolithic. And then there's a little graveyard cemetery in the back that also has some very ancient stuff. So there's an ongoing research. There's some ongoing research done because it's a site that apparently they think was inhabited by the Celts way, way before Christianity. And there's a legend that there was a spring that came out of the ground in between the two openings in the rock. And it was a sacred site for the Celts. And that was why the very first hermitage was built there.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because very often they did that. They incorporated pre-Christian things into it. So
sure, they would build a new church wherever people used to worship.
People used to worship.
Yeah.
And so there's a parking area. There's a little bit of a picnic area. There's this lovely little cafe, and it's really beautiful. It's just really beautiful. And it's very nice because it's tiny, and this is all there is there.
Right.
And it's quiet.
Probably not masses of people.
Not masses of people. In the summertime, you get a fair number of people coming through if they have read about it as part of the region and they understand
Or they've heard about it on this podcast.
Or they've heard about it on the podcast.
Yeah.
And I've been there, I'd say 6 times. It's a magical spot. It just really is. It's very lovely. And I love the fact that it's surrounded by a few very beautiful old houses, medieval houses, and then there are some more modern ones a little bit further away. It's very quiet, and the villagers have given you access to both the place and then a place where you can sit and have a picnic or go in and have a coffee.
Yeah, it's very nice.
And it's really nice. And you can go from there to the next stop, which is the town of Mirepoix.
So just for people who have possibly lost track, we were talking about the small place called Vals, V-A-L-S. That's where this magical old
underground
church is. Yeah.
Right.
And now we're moving on to Mirepoix.
Now we're going to move on to Mirepoix. And to get to Mirepoix, you have 2 options. You can go back to the main road, which is the big road. That's a very busy road that you have to turn off to get to Vals. Or you can stay on the country road, which starts out being departmental 40. I was looking at the map yesterday, and then it turns into something else.
Right.
Both of which will take you eventually to Mirepoix.
Okay,
because they run east-west.
Okay, is there an interest in taking the D road?
The D road is very pretty.
Okay.
You don't have to worry about getting back into big traffic. It's 12 and a half kilometers from there to Mirepoix. Okay. It's really a nice little 10 to 15-minute drive.
Yeah.
That's just very bucolic.
Okay.
And it gives you a beautiful view, a continuing view over the Pyrenees.
Yeah.
You go through a tiny little village called Theillet. This is a hard one.
Theillet.
Theillet. T-E-I-L-H-E-T.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's pretty much how you pronounce it.
Okay, I can't see it in my head yet.
T-E-I-L-H-E-T.
What do you?
Yeah. What? And there's a church that has a very, very beautiful facade that's from the 1200s.
Wow.
Just a quick stop. I mean, if you're interested, it's just really...
Just to see the facade of the church.
Just to see the facade of the church.
Is the church open at all?
I Don't know. The one time that I did stop there, I was not open. So
this is something that you will run into a lot in rural France like this, is that we have a lot of very old churches, but they're not necessarily open.
No.
Because if nobody volunteers to mind the church and make sure no damage is done, whatever, they're not going to open it up to the public.
No, they're not. But what I do remember is that we went off looking for a Merovingian cemetery, which is the whole story, which is, of course, early Frankish style cemetery from the 600s and 700s, which actually is there, but you don't have general access to it behind the village. And there was this beautiful facade of this church. So it was just worth just a quick stop for those people who are interested in that kind of architecture. And then the road takes you back, and then eventually you will get to Mirepoix. And then Mirepoix, which is the major town in the area, is a major stop. And my suggestion, just as a suggestion, but take my suggestion, whatever, is that it's a great place to have lunch.
Yeah, they have several restaurants.
They have several restaurants.
And an adorable little town square.
Right. Now, we did do, I believe, a podcast a long time ago on Mirepoix, but just as a reminder, Mirepoix it's really beautiful and it's very special. Now, it's a town. It's not a teeny village. It's a town of about 3,500 people, but it's very, very active and very lively and fairly bustling because it is the center of a lot of activity and a lot of teeny little villages that surround it. So even though it's not bigger than that, it does have a cinema that plays, I think it's a few nights a week. I don't think it's every single night. It has lots of restaurants. It has a couple of very nice hotels in the center. And it's famous for its huge open square as a bastide. And a bastide is a style of medieval town that was created, in the case of Mirepoix, it was actually created from scratch in the year 1289 because the old Mirepoix, which was on the other side of the river, got washed away. It got washed away by a huge flood in the 1270s, and the town was literally destroyed, and the only thing that was left was part of the castle, which of course was always on safe ground, higher up above the villagers. And the lord of the area, whose name was Lévy Mirepoix, and who was a member of the nobility who had been given charge of that whole area, he literally gave the land for the building of the new town on the other side of the river, just high enough up so that it doesn't flood. Not much higher, but just about, 4 meters or 5 meters higher up than the riverbank so that it doesn't flood. And being that it was the time when new villages were built in this very special way, it became a bastide. And a bastide, of course, is a village that was built on a grid system. It wasn't one of these zig-and-zaggy old medieval street ones. It's very much on a grid system to this day, with the center of the town being the town square for commerce as opposed to being the church.
Right.
And Mirepoix is famous, and it's famous all through the southwest of France because of how beautiful it is, how carefully kept it has been, because it is still exactly that. It is a town. It still has parts of its walls. It has two of the medieval doorways, even though they do not close now at night. You can get in and out whenever you want. And around the major square, which is huge, it's one of the biggest squares of any bastide ever built, are beautiful houses in all different colors that date starting from the 1500s up through into the 1700s.
Yeah, it's a lovely place. It really is.
And it's really lovely.
We've mentioned it on several episodes, but we even dedicated a whole episode to it. So if you'd like to listen to that, if you're planning on going, I recommend listen to that because you learn about the history of the area, and it's very cool.
It's very cool. And it's also a place that has exceptionally, unusually, it's Monday that has the big market day there. Most places don't have markets on Monday, but Mirepoix has a huge market on Monday. But it's a place that you can have a stop for a coffee, for a drink, or eat lunch. Had lunch there just a couple of weeks ago when I was there. It's got bookstores. It's got shops of other kinds. It's got everything you need.
Grocery stores,
pharmacy.
Yeah, everything. It's a big
absolutely
town.
everything. And it's a big town, and it's beautiful, and it's a really great stop. So it's got a church, Saint Maurice, which used to be a cathedral, which is interesting to see. It's not in very good condition, and I was back inside at this time, and it is kind of sad because obviously they're not investing the money to take care of it, and there's a lot of mold on sections of the wall, and even though it's still an active church, it still has mass.
But if the mayor doesn't want to invest in the church, then that's what's gonna happen.
That's what's going to happen, and it is rather sad because at the same time, there's. I made a note of some of the activities that there are, because there's actually a music festival that takes place in Saint Maurice every year. And it's a beautiful festival of classical music. But also, there are lots of festivals that take place in Mirepoix. The third weekend in July, there's a medieval festival that lasts 4 days. Mm-hmm. So you get to see people dressed in costume and then selling things that they're telling you are what people ate 600 years ago. Probably don't believe them, but whatever, it's probably really good cheese and whatever anyway. The first weekend in August, there's a marionette festival.
Oh, my daughter went to that one.
It's really lovely.
She liked it.
There are concerts in the cathedral from May to October, not every single week, but all through the period from May to October, there are wonderful concerts in Saint Maurice. Mm-hmm. And so there's lots and lots to do. For some people who are interested in actually spending time in that area, it's a good base to start from. Mm-hmm. There are things to rent along the way. There are Airbnbs in and around the Mirepoix, or you can do as hotels, or go like we did simply for the day. It's a wonderful day trip.
Yeah.
So when you've had your lunch, and you're ready to move on and move your body again. And that depends on how much you've had to drink, of course, on top of everything else. Yeah. And they also have actually a very good ice cream place there. Oh, gosh. Oh, my dear. There are two wonderful tiny little places to visit that are very close by. We're talking relative, just between 6 and 12 kilometers from there. And one of them is a very beautiful, tiny little village called Camon.
Camon.
Camon. C-A-M-O-N. Mm-hmm. And Camon is famous for having what is called a church castle, which simply means that the church and the castle were built together. One is really part of the other, and they were fortified when they were built. And they are the entire little village, and it's a small village, but it's really very beautiful, is up on top of a hill. And the entire village was encircled with ramparts because it was originally built in the 1100s. And in the early 1500s, the Bishop of Saint Maurice, who was a descendant of the famous noble family, the Lévy Mirepoix. Mm-hmm. He decided he wanted to have a separate residence. And being a bishop, he was allowed to do what he wanted.
Sure.
And so they took what was actually the primitive old feudal castle there, and they turned it, we could say remodeled it. I don't know if they rebuilt it, to be very honest. I have no idea if they actually rebuilt it or they just remodeled it, and turned it into a beautiful Renaissance castle in the middle of the 1500s. And it is contiguous. It is really part of the same structure as the gorgeous church. Huh. And all of the houses are from the 15 and 1600s. Oh. And they're beautiful. And they all circle around the castle and church. And the other thing that makes the village very special, and it's listed as one of the most beautiful villages in France, which is a category you kind of hoo-hoo, but actually it means that they've been really well taken care of.
Yeah, they try,
is that it's famous for its roses.
Roses?
Yes.
Ah, yeah.
And 2 weekends ago...
This time of year, it would be nice.
Exactly. And so guess what? We missed it by a weekend because it wasn't the weekend that we were there, but the weekend before was their annual Festival of Roses.
Oh, so they come in early.
And
roses.
They come in early there. Yeah, well, it's about 350 meters up. So that's about 1,000 feet So it has and it's lovely, actually. It's got a very nice climate there. And every single house has roses in front of it. It's just absolutely gorgeous to see. And there's a few arcades, and there's a lot of the remnants of the medieval architecture. And it's a tiny little village, but it's a lovely stop. And it really gives people an idea of how many beautiful little villages existed, especially as we get into what is really the Renaissance times, which is the 1500s. We're no longer in these primitive feudal towns that are all fortified, although there are remnants of that there.
Sure.
You see how it kind of changes and opens up, and it's a perfect stop after doing Vals and then Mirepoix.
Very good.
And then from there, you take the road, and now I do need your GPS because I'm not going to give directions because I'm sure I'll give wrong directions anyway. There is for a fascinating stop, and that is to see the ruins. In this case, it's really the ruins, but very impressive ruins of a huge chateau called La Garde. La Garde. And again,
one word.
One word. It's a huge. The ruins are really impressive because it shows you how huge this was. A Renaissance chateau that was built on top of something primitive, but it was rebuilt again. It was built. There was originally something built by the King of Aragon, actually, in the year 1000, because in approximately the year 1000, the frontier between the Kingdom of Aragon and the Kingdom of the Counts of Toulouse was really right there.
I see.
And, it shifted further south later on when this area got annexed to the Kingdom of France. But the original structure there was actually built in the 1000s by the King of Aragon, who was, of course, a cousin of the Counts of Toulouse because they were all cousins.
Yeah.
And it was rebuilt again in the 1300s by members of the Levi Mirepoix family.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And then, like with all of these other places in the area, in the 1500s, it got rebuilt and it was expanded and it was made into this luxurious, absolutely apparently magnificent Renaissance chateau, which was famous for being gorgeous and really enormous.
So how did it fall into ruins?
It fell into ruin for two reasons. Because of the War of Religions.
Okay.
Which apparently took its toll in the area. And there was a lot of infighting, between the families that had moved to the new Reformed Protestant religion, and they started attacking each other. And then the French Revolution.
Okay.
And then the French Revolution. And it was considered to be one of the most beautiful Renaissance chateaux in the early 1600s. So what is left is the foundation and some of the walls made out of stone. And it's up on top of this just slightly sloping hill. That's really what's there. But it has a view absolutely fabulous over into the Pyrenees. And so there are some pictures there. They've set up, because it is an archaeological site, there are pictures that give an idea of what it was like when it was this absolutely magnificent Renaissance chateau, because Renaissance chateaux were open. They weren't feudal. They didn't have to worry about fortifications. And they say that it's a shame, but it was just left to fall into ruin simply because by the time you get into the 1700s, we get up until the time of the French Revolution, and then there are other things that are priority.
Yeah.
It just becomes nothing that's a priority anymore.
Yeah.
But it was under the auspices of the huge commune of Mirepoix.
Okay.
And it belonged to them. So it's kind of impressive to see. It's just interesting to walk around and imagine.
Do you have to walk up a steep hill to get to it?
No, it's
or
not
you
steep
can
at all.
park?
No, you can park. You
can
just park
close.
right near.
Yeah,
Right.
okay.
Yeah. It's just it's not steep at all. The steepest thing so far is actually just a little bit of the village of Camon, which is up and down, but it's not even really that steep either,
Yeah.
But to get to La Garde, there's a parking area right near there, and there are volunteers that belong to the local historical society. There was somebody there when we went, and they just talked to you a little bit about it. I assume they're mostly weekends, anyway. But it's kind of neat. All of this area is so filled with that kind of history. And then you get back on the main road that is actually going south, and you go to and through a small city it's bigger than Mirepoix, and that is La Valannée.
La Valannée.
And La Valannée, which is an old industrial town.
Right, I've been to that one, but
it's not pretty.
I have no memories of it.
Well, this is the thing about La Valannée, and it's kind of interesting, but it's also, I guess, a little bit sad. It's typical of all these really rural places that for a long time had what would we call cottage industries. In this case, there was a lot of textile industry in that part of Ariège. There was metallic industry, there was metallurgy, but there was a lot of textile because of all the small rivers that were running through the area in the foothills of the Pyrenees. And La Valannée was famous for production of wool and cloth made out of wool. And from the 18th century into the 20th century, it was that was its major industry, and that was what kept the town alive. And of course, a lot of that industry left. The town itself is both old and new. There's a little part that's very pretty. It's not a pretty town in general. It gives you the feeling of a place that was once very prosperous but no longer is. There is now still some textile industry because a couple of the companies that produce textiles for automobiles and planes has moved into the area.
Okay.
But what is interesting, if you're interested in the history of that kind of thing, is that there is a museum of textiles there. And it took a long time for them to set it up and create it. And I was there the first time just after it opened up. I actually took a group of people there to see it. We did a couple of the villages in the area, and then we went there. And it is actually rather fascinating because it's the history of industry, of making of textiles, particularly in wool. And it covers really the history of how women worked. It has these enormous looms that show what their work was like, even in the late 1700s into the 1800s. And it takes you through all the steps with much of the machinery, which of course was hand run. And then eventually some of the automatic looms that were used at the time when it was automated in the 20th century. And there's a little shop that gives you an idea of some of the products that were sold. And they show you about carding wool and all of things. And it was really a major industry that kept people going for a long time in the valley because it's on a river. And it of course talks about what has happened and the transformation of all of these things. So it is interesting.
Right.
And this is not going to La Valannée because the buildings are beautiful or anything. It's a place you can stop, and obviously it's a small town. So,
there's probably some of everything.
There's a little bit of everything there. Just absolutely a little bit of everything. I forgot to mention on the way, if you're still interested in Renaissance Chateau, when you leave La Garde and you're on the road going to La Valannée, a lot of these things begin with L, I just realized,
La Garde,
La Valannée. There's a very small town called Léran, L-E-R-A-N, but L-E accent aigu.
I've heard of that one.
Which has a Renaissance chateau also, that was also one of the descendants of the Lévis-Mirepoix. And that Renaissance chateau has been turned into private apartments. And you can go up to there's a huge park surrounding it, which has, of course, grill work, iron work surrounding it, and it's along a little river. I know someone who lives in the village. She's actually English. There's a lot of English-speaking people who have moved into Léron and the area around it. It has a couple of art galleries. It has a couple of cafes. But she was the one that took me to see the chateau. It's just right there. I mean, it's just, on the outer edge of this little village.
Okay.
And
so it's not 7 places, it's 8 places.
It's 8 places. And 3 of them begin with an L. And she said to me, if you want, you can go live there. And I thought, whoa, that would really be cool. I said, can we go visit somebody? And she said, well, no. She said, the one person I knew who lived there actually is not there anymore. And it turns out that it's really gorgeous. I mean, it's this incredible Renaissance.
So they split up the Renaissance chateau into apartments.
And the last of the Lévis Mirepoix was living in it until the end of the 20th century.
Oh.
And I think they, if I remember correctly, because they added on a couple of ridiculous 19th century turrets, which didn't really need it to be added on because it's just really beautiful, magnificent Renaissance chateau. And I thought, wow, I'd really like to go and visit it inside a little bit.
We need to get to know somebody who lives in there.
We need to get to know somebody. And just really, it's probably disappointing because they probably put all this, plasterboard in and made this into sort of modern looking on the inside, but I hope not.
Right. Well, we don't know. So you can see it from the outside.
You can see it from the outside.
The rest of the village is interesting or not so much?
Not so much.
Not so much.
There are two streets with some really pretty medieval houses.
Yeah.
And then it's a little bit of a scattering of things. But it's kind of cute because you can see how all of these areas have these lovely little villages like that. Anyway, it's just a very short detour off the main road.
Yeah, short detour between La Garde and
La Vallonnais.
La Vallonnais, yeah.
And so La Vallonnais, if you stop, you can go to visit this textile museum. You can even just stop and take a look in the shop if you want to, because it's kind of interesting, and you can get a nice postcard or something like that. It's kind of interesting to see something that's not just pretty. It's just, this is the way real people live. I mean, this is not just
we have a lot of towns like that in France that are not that pretty, honestly. And I know, as somebody from outside of France, you probably have this romantic vision of France being all unicorns and rainbows, right. But it's not.
It's not.
We have places that are like, wow.
And it's I have to say, you're going to laugh, but one of the other reasons why La Vallonnais really stays in my mind is because on the French soccer team that won the World Championship in 1998, the goalie was a man named Labarthe.
Yeah.
And Labarthe is from La Vallonnais.
Oh.
And therefore, it's important.
It's important, yeah.
It's important.
The goalie was from La Vallonnais.
The goalie from La Vallonnais.
I know.
With a very strong Ariègeois accent on top
very
of
nice, very nice.
Anyway,
nice touch.
It's nice touch, right?
Yeah.
So there's La Vallonnais. And it is really kind of interesting to see, I'd say, the other side of the coin from the picture pretty, perfect little villages, and to see what happens in areas like that. Those of you who are listening from the States, who are from places like parts of Pennsylvania or the Appalachia or anything like that, you understand what it's like when you live in an area that has had a lot of its industry disappear, and you wonder what the next thing is going to be that's going to keep people going, keep them from leaving and abandoning an entire town completely.
Yeah.
And then you continue on the road, you go through La Vallonnais, and you will get on the main road, and then you will come to signs that indicate you are going to be going towards Montségur.
Yeah, Montségur. That's one I've been to a few times, actually.
And Montségur is very famous. It's very famous in the history of the area. It's an incredible site, S-I-T-E, right? And it is, of course, the place where the last of the Cathars, the people that belong to this strange reformist Christian movement in the 1200s, took refuge on the top of this incredible peak, and the word in Occitan is Pog, P-O-G, which literally means a rocky promontory up on top of a mountain. And they took refuge in a castle that actually existed starting in the 1000s, but was rebuilt by a man named Raymond de Pereille, who was a nobleman in the area, P-E-R-E-I-L-L-E. And he paid to have this, what was actually already old fortified castle, rebuilt so that at the time, they think there were approximately 500 people who went to live there. And when you go there, you have one of two options. You take a road that goes off the main road, and it will take you up into the mountains. And it's rather impressive because unless it's a terribly nasty, cloudy day, you go around one bend in the road and you see the ruins of this up on top of a hill, and you go, not a hill, of a mountain, then you go, no, it's not possible, really. Yeah, it is possible, especially in those days. And when you eventually get to the site, there's a big parking lot down below. Now you have an option of either going up or not. You know, I mean, you can either just stay down below and move around and take photographs from different places, or be adventurous and take, we were just talking about it, maybe 20 to 30 minutes, not
Yeah, so it's a little
really
bit of a
20,
hike.
25 minutes.
It's kind of steep in
It's steep.
parts. It's definitely not something you cannot do it with a stroller
No.
or anything like that. It'll get your heart pumping.
Yeah, it will get your heart pumping.
Yeah.
You have to have good shoes.
Good shoes.
You have to have
yeah.
good shoes because it's not.
I mean-
some of it is big rocks. You have to step up. Part of it is easy. Going through the beginning goes through some woods, and then you get to these big rocks, and it's kind of like almost like jumble
Big
rocks.
steps, yeah.
You know, big steps. But of course, people do it all the time.
Yeah, I've done it possibly 3 times. I don't
Yeah.
remember, but having seen it 2 or 3 times, I'm not sure I'd do it again. But,
Right.
But it's because you get up there and there's nothing but a few walls.
Oh no! Well, actually, there's certainly a lot more than at La Garde. I mean, there are big walls. There's a whole thing, and the view.
walls.
The view is spectacular.
The view is nice. Very
and
nice.
also now there are panels up there that do explain a lot of the history. And
Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
Didn't used to be up there.
no, and then there's a kind of entranceway where they put some wood planking and things like that.
Right, so you pay to go up now.
Now you
don't
pay to go
Yeah,
up.
Yeah.
Yes. Now,
Yeah.
because it is run by the department.
Yeah.
And it is a very important historical
Right,
site.
and see, back when I went, you didn't pay.
You didn't
just
pay.
Went up.
The first couple of times I went there, you didn't pay it either.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
now you definitely do have to pay.
Yeah.
But if you can do it, if you're nimble enough, you can do it even with kids, although tiny little kids, you'd have to carry them. And that I don't know if you want to do. But it's really worth it on a nice, clear day because it is spectacular. And
Yeah.
also because the story of Montségur is so incredible. When you get up to the top, and you know that for several years, over 500 people actually lived up there.
And it wasn't that big of a chateau.
And it wasn't that big a chateau, although part of it was totally destroyed. So you have to know that there was actually more to it. And there was actually a little bit more to it that was halfway down the mountain. I mean, that they were living. And there was a tunnel. So one of the ways they actually, besides the mules, one of the ways they actually got food up to the people was because they had dug a tunnel at least halfway up. And the story is that the siege that was done by the army of the French king was to finally get rid of this group of people, and they surrounded them in the year 1244, and they basically starved them out, and then basically gave them the choice of either giving up or they were going to set fire to the castle. And we do know that a few people did leave, a few people did escape. There's a legend about a fortune in money that went somewhere, they think to Lombardy, but who knows? Nobody's ever found it. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the people, which means about half of the original 500 or so, did not leave, and they died in a fire.
Yeah.
And they were
martyrs to
the to the cause of their new religion. A little bit like the legendary story of Masada, you know. I mean, it's the same kind of thing, you know, dying as martyrs because they refused to give up their religion, and they would have been killed most likely anyway. But it became a site of this famous massacre, the massacre of Montségur. And it was really the end of the Qatar movement, basically. You know, the few people that existed that still were Qatar left the region, went somewhere else, and that was the end of that.
Yeah, and I keep wanting to do an episode about the Cathars. The problem is that there's a lot of lore about them that is turning out to not be true.
Right.
So a lot of the books that have been written really are outdated information, and so it's hard for me to make sense of what's true and what's not, because I've been reading books about them for a long time.
There is a book that I have. I have many books about the Qatar. Interestingly enough, one of the most accurate books about the Qatar is a book that was written by somebody who was a member of the Inquisition. Because they have testimony, and it's very carefully, because they had to keep records of everything for the Inquisition. So they have records of who was brought before the Inquisition as a Qatar. And we're talking still about the Qatar, not later on. And what they were accused of and what their punishments were. And most of them were not executed. That was, in fact, a rare case. It was only in exceptional cases that they were executed. But it was interesting to read what they were accused of, and they describe, and it's very interesting to know because it's very similar to something that has nothing to do with this, which is when the Spanish arrived in the New World, between question mark, between entre guillemets, as they say in French, in the New World, it was the Franciscan monks who documented everything that they saw and the customs and the language and the culture of the peoples that they met in Florida and then in Mexico. And to this day, it is the most accurate historical documentation that we have.
Right.
So it's interesting because that is, along with new archaeological finds, that is actually where some of the best information is. But in the case of Montségur, you have, if you want to do the climb, just keep in mind the amount of time it takes to go up to the top, to take some pictures and appreciate what it is really like up there.
It'll probably be a couple of hours by the time
it's
you
a couple
get
of
there,
hours to
walk
get there,
up,
right, and come down.
Come down, yeah.
And then go down, and then you go back on the road. You have to sort of backtrack a little bit on the road to get back to the main road. And then you continue in the same direction you were going in, and you have an option. You either eventually just get back on the autoroute, which will take you eventually back to Toulouse, if that's where your destination is. Or you can make one more stop. And if it's a beautiful day, a sunny day, I strongly recommend it, especially if it's in the summertime, because the sun lasts for a long time. There's light out here in this area till 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, 11 sometimes.
It's really amazing. And that is, you will come to a sign to turn off to the right instead of turning to the left, which is where Montségur was, and you go climbing up another mountain, and you get driving up. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, climbing in a car. Yes.
Yeah.
And you get to another village which has another incredible ruin, and that is La Roquefixade. And La Roquefixade was another Cathar stronghold that has been turned into a ruin. The village is small, but is incredibly beautiful. It is beautiful, really beautiful. It's a very, very, very high up.
And you can drive all the way up to
and you can drive all the way up, although the parking spaces, you have to, once it gets to be crowded summertime, sometimes you have to park a little bit down below, and there's a cafe and a refuge for hikers where you can get yourself a coffee or something like that. And then from there, it's a hike, a real hike, to get to the ruins of the chateau of La Roquefixade. But even if you don't get that far up, but you can, and it's incredible because the view from there is stupendous, because you have a view of Montségur, you have a view out over the valley, you have a view of the entire range of the Pyrenees Mountains, because you're facing south from there. But even if you don't get that high, even if you just stop at the top of the village, you still get a really good view, and you still get a view of Montségur. And it's because it's the south side, the vegetation is totally different from Montségur. It's very Mediterranean. So you have a lot more Mediterranean-style plants, and you have the smell of lots of flowers. I was just there the other day, and it was just incredible. It's worth taking the car up if you can get
do at least that much.
Do that much, yeah.
Right, because if you're going to hike all the way to the old castle,
that's long.
That would take a long time.
That'd take a long time.
Several hours.
We're already talking about, between the Montségur and that, you're talking about almost a half a day already.
Right.
So this is only if you're staying in the area, and you can do both.
You can do both.
But to complete the circuit, it's really a great thing to do, especially if you really like big views out over the mountains.
Sure.
And I really love the fact that it has much more Mediterranean plants because it is on the south side of the mountains, And then you go back down, and then you get back on the big road, and eventually it's real easy. You get to see the signs, direction
Head back to Toulouse.
And if not, you can always stop for the night in Foix, F-O-I-X, but that's another whole story.
Awesome.
So there's our day in Ariège.
I'm going to have to go and see some of these places. I must say the first one, Valls, is intriguing to me.
It's intriguing.
Because of the old church. And
it's actually
that sounds really good.
It has a really interesting vibe. It really does.
Yeah.
There's just something about it.
Sounds really, and La Roque Fixade also sounds good. I've seen that. I've heard of it. I've just never
It's
been
kind
up
of
there.
impressive because it's not as famous as Montségur, and of course it doesn't have the story of the martyrs attached to it.
Right.
But boy, when you drive up to the village and then you go, oops, and then you look up and you see where the ruin of the chateau is.
So do you think that's also a half-hour hike, or is it longer?
Not longer, but it's a good half hour.
Half-hour hike,
Yeah.
okay.
And because it's the south side, you have to be careful of the sun.
Yeah, you might bake.
You might bake.
In the summer.
You might bake in the summer.
And you might also drown in water in the winter.
And I just want to say one thing, because this is true for both, it's true for La Roque Fixade, but it's true of Montségur, and it's true of a lot of these places. In France, a lot of these places have a very little protection. That is, there are signs that say you do this at your own risk.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very typical in France.
There is no banisters,
Right.
balustrades, developed steps, paved roads, none of that.
None of that.
If you fall off the cliff, you fall off the cliff.
And it's goodbye.
Yes, and it's bye-bye.
And it's bye-bye.
because they don't have the budget to make it safe.
So it really is, and that is just as a way of saying, think if this is not something to do with teenage children, unless you really are a very experienced hiker and you have the baby on your back, or just be aware of this as a condition for going to any of these places.
Right.
However, to go up to the ruins of La Roque Fixade, because I did not go that far, we just stopped in the village this time, unless it's changed, you don't have to pay.
Okay.
You don't have to pay. It's just
This
that
one
you
is
have
free.
to do the hike.
Right.
You have to do your hiking. Anyway, so that's our day in Ariège.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You're so generous with all these little places that nobody would have ever heard of.
Oh, but it's so much fun. And there are actually more, but God, we can't do them all in one day. Oh, we just can't,
That's right. Merci, Elise.
You are quite welcome.
And we'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Au revoir.
Au revoir. Thank you, Shelley Short-Terhune, Alain Kester, for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. And my thanks to all the other patrons who support the show month after month. Thank you so much for giving back. Would you buy me a coffee if we met in real life? You can do that by supporting the show on Patreon for as little as $2 per month. Visit patreon.com/join us. So that's Patreon. Join us with no spaces or dashes to see the different reward tiers. And thank you so much for giving back. And thank you also to Ivan Ware and Aaron Colvard for your one-time donation. Aaron said, I'm traveling with my niece to the Côte d'Azur, kayaking the Pont du Gard, hiking Chamonix, and exploring Paris for her high school graduation gift. We land in France tomorrow, but you have already been my invaluable virtual guide for a year as I listen to almost all the podcast episodes while I walk to work every morning. Oh, that's very nice to know. As a person who likes to be prepared, I have never felt so prepared and informed for a trip. You covered practically every destination and online resources I had discovered on my own, plus answered so many questions that I would have never known to ask. I have gone from having no idea that what SNCF is or how to use it, to a level of competence about train in France that will save a lot of bumbling in the moment. Thank you, Annie. And thank you, Aaron, for giving back. You can send in a one-time donation too by going to any page on joinusinfrance.com and clicking the green button that says Tip Your Guide. For my personal update this week, I am done writing my first GPS-aware tour for Paris that explores the area around Notre-Dame and Ile de la Cité. My editor is doing his magic, and then I'll record it and we'll announce the release very soon. Now, if you want to be sure to hear about the release of the tour, sign up for the extras on any page on Join Us in France. It's the green button is the extras. Patrons at the $5 level will also get this tour for free because I love you guys. More details soon. But I want your input on something. Is it better to call this a GPS-aware tour or should I call it a smartphone tour? What it is really is a narrative that takes you from point A to point B and helps you discover the area. The phone will show you a map, but you don't need to look at your phone at all. You'll be able to follow my voice because I'll tell you where to go. So I'll put it up to a vote on the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook, so you can help me decide if I should call it GPS aware tour or smartphone tour. You guys are smart. I know you'll help me crack this. I put out a call for photos of Chartres and Reims on the Facebook group and got lots of images. Thank you for responding so generously. Now, some people just posted the photos on Facebook, which is nice. I like to see them, but I need you to email them to me. One, because Facebook crunches photos and makes them look really bad once I save them again and try to use them in, a high resolution kind of way. And also because if you've emailed it to me, it means you've given me permission to use it. Otherwise, I can't, I don't want to use people's photos from Facebook if they didn't give me permission. That's really the bottom line. I need lots of photos to promote, the 237 episodes of the show. Sometimes I have my own. Sometimes I can use photos that are in the public domain, but sometimes I'm stuck. I don't have enough good photos. So I think I'll ask for photos when I need some because you guys take a lot of great shots. And you go everywhere. It's amazing. So if you have a great picture of a place we've talked about on the podcast and you'd like me to use it in promoting the show, email it to me, Annie@joinusinfrance.com. But I need high definition photos. And what am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for a photo that represents the place, that's truthful about the place is what I'm after. As you know, because you're listening to me right now, you can hear Join Us in France anywhere you get your podcasts. That includes every podcast app under the sun, as well as Pandora, Spotify, and Alexa. And if you want to recommend the podcast to someone who is not a podcast listener, I recommend you send them to joinusinfrance.com, the website, because there they'll be able to read a summary of the episode as well as listen if they are somewhere they can listen. And I am trying to promote all the previous episodes of this podcast on social media. And when you see one for an episode that you particularly like, please share it. It's a great way to help your friends get the information they need about France. So questions and feedback need to be sent to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. I wish you a wonderful week of trip planning or a wonderful week in France, and I will talk to you next week. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2019 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.